I assume the only people who saw him were the ones who were killed.
Some of them survived, and they would just report like a large looming figure, like a dark figure.
Oh.
So he really did become kind of like a boogeyman. It kind of gives me the creeps.
In the early hours of the night, New Orleans became a city afraid to sleep. A quiet intruder moved through homes, leaving confusion, fear, and unanswered questions behind. No clear motive, no clear identity, just a growing sense that someone was watching. Newspapers struggled to explain it, police struggled to stop it, and families struggled to feel safe in their own beds. Then, at the height of the panic, a chilling message appeared that forced an entire city to act. Who was the Axeman of New Orleans, and how did he vanish without a trace? A city on edge. 1918, New Orleans was a city full of life, sound, and movement. Music drifted from open windows, neighbors knew each other by name, and small family businesses lined the streets. Many of those businesses were grocery stores run by immigrant families, especially Italian Americans, who lived and worked in close-knit neighborhoods. Life was not easy, but it was predictable. People trusted their routines, they trusted their homes, that sense of safety would not last. The year itself was already heavy with strain. The nation was emerging from World War I, and the influenza outbreak had left fear, loss, and uncertainty behind. Police departments were understaffed, hospitals were overwhelmed, and families were still trying to recover from months of hardship. It was during this fragile moment that reports began to surface about a nighttime intruder. At first, the incidents seemed unrelated, a break-in here, a serious injury there, but soon, troubling similarities began to appear. What unsettled residents most was not just the violence, but the setting. These incidents did not happen in alleyways or abandoned areas. They happened inside homes late at night while people slept. Entry was quiet, household tools were used, and strangely, valuables were often left untouched. This was not a crime driven by money. It suggested intention, patience, and a presence that moved with purpose. Without realizing it, the city was beginning to glimpse a pattern. The news spread through newspapers and local street talks, which created an atmosphere of fear that people started to experience. The people started to change their daily activities. The people started to secure their homes by locking their doors 2 times. The people left their lights on throughout the night. The people experienced their sleep as short periods of restless sleep. The men protected their families while they stayed alert because they considered every sound after midnight to be a danger. The house noises created their own meaning. The people of the city developed a sense of vulnerability because they believed that intruders could access their homes without detection. The press amplified that unease. The headlines showed that one person was responsible for the attacks, which the authorities had not yet confirmed. The witness accounts established a common visual representation of a shadowy man who appeared without warning and vanished just as quickly. The information showed no identification of the suspect, his purpose, or his reasons for committing the crime. People used their fears to fill the knowledge gaps that remained because of missing information. At the moment when officials declared these events were not separate events, the people of New Orleans had already started to prepare for the situation. The situation developed into a common pattern. The situation developed into an uncontrollable situation. And soon, the unseen figure behind the attacks would make himself known in a way no one expected, by speaking directly to the city itself. But before his voice was heard, his actions had already begun to reveal a chilling routine. The Axeman's pattern. As the attacks continued, investigators and residents began to notice a disturbing consistency. Whoever was responsible did not strike at random. There was a method, one that became clearer with each new incident. The intruder appeared to watch, wait, and move with quiet confidence. Entry was often made through a rear door or window, sometimes by removing a small panel rather than breaking the door down. This suggested patience and familiarity, not panic or haste. It felt as though the attacker knew exactly how much noise he could make without being heard. One of the most unsettling details was the choice of weapon. The attacker rarely brought anything with him. Instead, he used tools found inside the home, most often an axe or hatchet that belonged to the victims themselves. After the attack, the tool was usually left behind. To many, this felt intentional rather than careless. It meant the intruder arrived empty-handed and left just as he came. There was no weapon to trace, no item carried through the streets. The message was clear and deeply uncomfortable. Even the objects meant for daily work could be turned against their owners. The attacks that occurred during specific times created additional terror for people. Most attacks occurred during nighttime hours when people were not awake. The victims experienced their attacks while they slept because they showed a state between sleep and wakefulness. The survivors fought to remember their experiences from that time. The attacker's description started with a person who stood above them as a tall, dark figure. The other witnesses could only describe their experience through three things, which they found difficult to understand. The police faced difficulties in creating a complete suspect description because the witnesses provided incomplete information about the attacker. The crime scene featured a complete absence of robbery, which created a second unusual aspect. The criminals left money, jewelry, and other valuable items untouched despite their visibility. The case had moved into more dangerous territory because the motive had been eliminated. The reason for the crime remained unknown, which created more anxiety for the public than any other fact. Some people believe that the attacker executed his plan to take revenge because of his hatred for the victims. Some people believed that the crimes existed to create fear among others. The absence of information led to the spread of false information, which word-of-mouth networks shared. The pattern started to show its true form, which caused people throughout the city to become anxious. People began checking their sheds and kitchens, counting tools, and wondering if owning an axe made them vulnerable. Families took turns sleeping throughout the night. Some people stored makeshift weapons within easy reach. Yet the police department increased its patrols, yet the assaults continued without interruption. The new development strengthened the belief that the attacker had superior knowledge of the city's patterns than anyone attempting to catch him. The figure had reached the point where he needed a designated name. The Axeman had become more than a secret rumor because people spread his name throughout New Orleans. He had become a presence that controlled the way New Orleans residents slept, worked, and lived because he remained hidden from their view. Before long, his presence was impossible to ignore. Fear spread faster than facts, and clear thinking gave way to survival. Panic and misdirection. By late summer of 1918, fear had fully taken hold of New Orleans. What began as a quiet concern quickly turned into open panic. Each new incident made the front pages, and each headline added to the sense that the city was losing control. Police stations were overwhelmed with tips, many of them unclear or contradictory. Citizens called in to report shadows near their homes, unfamiliar men walking the streets, or strange sounds in the middle of the night. Some claimed they had discovered axes left in their yards or alleys. Most of these reports led nowhere, but they revealed how deeply fear had worked its way into daily life. As public pressure mounted, confidence in law enforcement began to weaken. Officers were expected to deliver answers, yet they had little solid evidence to work with. In response, arrests were sometimes made based on limited suspicion rather than proof. Neighbors began to look at one another differently. Employees were questioned. Strangers passing through town were detained. In several cases, people were held simply because they happened to be nearby when an attack occurred. These actions failed to reassure the public. Instead, they created frustration, mistrust, and a growing sense that no one truly knew what was happening. The limits of early investigative techniques made matters worse. Forensic science was still in its early stages, and many crime scenes were disturbed before they could be properly examined. Evidence was lost or overlooked. Witness statements often conflicted, especially when victims were injured, frightened, or half awake during the attacks. Without clear physical evidence or reliable descriptions, investigations stalled. Each unanswered question fed the belief that the attacker was always one step ahead. At the same time, everyday life began to change in visible ways. Men stayed awake through the night to guard their families. Some households slept together in the same room, believing numbers offered protection. Others invited relatives to stay over so no one would be alone. Businesses closed earlier than usual, and once lively streets grew quiet after sunset. Social gatherings declined. Even neighborhoods known for music and nightlife fell silent as darkness approached. Newspapers played a powerful role in shaping the mood of the city. Reports often painted the attacker as a single, unstoppable figure who moved freely through locked homes and avoided every attempt to catch him. This image took on a life of its own. Rumors spread faster than confirmed facts, and speculation filled the gaps left by uncertainty. The line between truth and assumption blurred. In this atmosphere, fear became its own force. It clouded judgment, pushed authorities toward rushed decisions, and strained trust within communities. While police chased leads that went nowhere, the true nature of the threat remained unclear, leaving the city anxious and exposed. And just when it seemed the city could not become more unsettled, the Axeman made a move no one expected. Instead of striking again, he chose to speak. The letter that stopped a city. In March of 1919, just as fear had become part of daily life in New Orleans, the Axeman broke his silence. A handwritten letter arrived at a local newspaper, written by someone claiming responsibility for the attacks. Whether it was truly sent by the slayer or by someone seeking attention, its effect was immediate. The message was bold, unsettling, and openly mocking toward the police. It claimed the writer could not be caught and suggested that any attempt to stop him would fail. At a time when authorities were struggling for answers, the letter felt like a direct challenge. What truly set the message apart was not just its tone, but its demand. The writer named a specific date and time when he planned to pass through the city once again. Then came a strange condition. He claimed to have a fondness for jazz music and promised to spare anyone whose home was filled with live jazz at that exact moment. Those who did not comply, he warned, would face consequences. The request sounded absurd on the surface, but fear made it impossible to ignore. No one knew if the threat was real, and few were willing to test it. The public response to the newspaper publication of the letter developed from their initial state of fear into an immediate emergency response. The residents of the area evaluated the authenticity of the message. However, their uncertainty made them decide to take protective measures. The streets of New Orleans experienced a complete transformation during that particular night. The city streets became alive with music that spilled from both the open windows and the bars and dance halls. The people who lacked record players in their homes created their own listening experiences by visiting their neighbors and attending local events. The professional musicians performed their music throughout the night while amateur musicians joined them to protect themselves. The same music that defined the city's identity now became a tool for survival. The atmosphere turned tense after the scheduled time had passed. The police officers maintained their operational readiness while they monitored the streets and awaited incoming information. Inside their homes, residents listened to the streets while they anticipated violent sounds to come through the music. The violent sounds never appeared. The people of the city discovered that an extraordinary event had taken place when the sun first rose. The police department reported no new incidents. New Orleans achieved its first uninterrupted night of peace in 3 months without any disturbances after midnight. The letter quickly became a legendary story. Some people believed that the document established the Axeman's existence and control over New Orleans. Some people considered it a fraudulent threat, while others regarded it as a malicious scheme to draw attention. The message, which originated from unknown sources, managed to achieve its first mission because it brought together the whole city through its power to create fear and sound. The city transformed music into a protective weapon that people used to face their apprehension of the unknown. But history would show that the silence following that night was only temporary. The Axeman was not finished yet. When the music faded, the fear crept back in, quietly and without warning. The final attacks. After the night of non-stop jazz, New Orleans slowly began to relax. Weeks passed without incident, and many believed the Axeman had either left the city or lost interest. Police patrols continued, but the urgency faded. People returned to their routines, hoping the terror was finally behind them. That sense of relief would not last. Months later, reports surfaced that felt disturbingly familiar. Once again, an intruder had entered a home during the night. Once again, a household tool was used, and once again, nothing was taken. These later attacks confused both the public and investigators because they did not always fit the earlier pattern perfectly. Some victims were not part of the original demographic that had been targeted before. Entry points varied. In one case, a window was used instead of a door panel. These small differences raised an unsettling question. Had the Axeman changed, or was someone else now copying his methods? Survivors of these final attacks struggled to provide clarity. Injuries left them with memory gaps, and descriptions remained vague. Most recalled only a dark figure and the sudden shock of being awakened. Without reliable testimony, police were left comparing details and debating whether these incidents belonged to the same series. Despite the uncertainty, the similarities were strong enough that most people believed the Axeman had returned. The final known fatal attack marked a grim turning point. The violence shocked the city, not just because of what happened, but because it felt like an ending without answers. Shortly after, the attack stopped entirely. There was no final message, no arrest, no explanation. The figure who had dominated headlines for over a year simply vanished. Speculation filled the silence. Some believed increased patrols and public vigilance finally scared the slayer away. Others thought he had been imprisoned for an unrelated crime or even died. There were also rumors that the last attacks were the result of personal disputes, conveniently blamed on the Axeman during a time of fear. Without proof, none of these ideas could be confirmed. What remained was a city trying to move forward while carrying unanswered questions. Families repaired their homes and attempted to reclaim a sense of safety. Newspapers shifted focus to other stories, but the memory lingered. To understand what truly happened, investigators and historians would have to look beyond the attacks themselves and toward the theories that followed. Who was the Axeman? When the attacks finally stopped, New Orleans was left with a haunting question that remains unanswered more than a century later. Who was the Axeman? With no arrest, no confession, and no definitive evidence, the case quickly became a breeding ground for theories. Each explanation tried to make sense of the fear, the patterns, and the sudden disappearance of the slayer. One of the most common ideas is that the Axeman was a single individual acting alone. Supporters of this theory point to the consistency of many attacks, the repeated methods, and the confidence shown in the letter sent to the press. This version paints the Axeman as someone deeply familiar with the city, comfortable moving through neighborhoods at night, and bold enough to mock authorities. Yet critics argue that the changes seen in later attacks suggest more than one person may have been involved. Multiple attackers or copycats might have committed the crimes, according to this alternate explanation. The public discovered the name Axeman, which then became a popular name used to describe many different violent incidents. The city already experienced widespread terror when criminal activity started to occur in multiple locations. The shifting patterns demonstrate how different targets and methods, together with new entry points, emerged. The investigation indicates that some Axeman-associated crimes might have had no actual connection to the crimes that were attributed to him. Organized crime stands as the primary theory that generates most of the ongoing debate among experts. The first victims who suffered attacks shared common background traits, which led people to believe that their deaths resulted from criminal activity aimed at collecting payments from immigrant groups through threats. The Axeman existed as a criminal organization member who operated in conjunction with his associates. According to this perspective, Joseph Mumphrey dominates this particular discussion due to his name appearing many times throughout the conversation. Authorities had identified him as a suspect who maintained links to criminal networks while he participated in multiple significant events through his activities and connections. Some people believed he used the Axeman fear to carry out additional criminal activities while staying in the open. The legal system failed to establish any evidence against Mumphrey, according to state officials. The evidence established a circumstantial case that depended on witness statements plus the established timelines and suspicious events that emerged later. His role in the crime remains an open question because investigators lack both physical evidence and a confession. The Axeman character exists between the boundaries that separate real-life existence from fictional storytelling. The existence of the Axeman proves that he terrified entire cities, while his identity remained unknown to the public. The Axeman of New Orleans left behind more than a trail of fear. He left a mystery that still refuses to settle. A city was changed, lives were altered, and the truth slipped away into history. Whether he was one man, many, or something far more complex, the unanswered questions remain. If you have your own theory about who the Axeman was, share it in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a forgotten mystery, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. And don't forget to watch the next video on your screen for another case that history never fully explained.